No one expected what was about to happen when Senator J.D. Vance leaned into his mic and mocked Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's Southern accent on live television. But he had no idea what was coming next. Right before we jump into this wild story, tell us, where are you watching from? You might be surprised how far this reaches, and neither did the nation watching. It was a high-stakes congressional hearing on racial equity in the justice system, broadcast live to millions. Cameras were rolling, news anchors whispered. Even staffers at the back of the chamber froze mid-text. The room, echoing with polished suits, smug grins, and scripted sound bites, felt like a pressure cooker waiting to blow. On one side sat J.D. Vance, Yale-educated, media-savvy, a rising Republican star with a knack for headline-grabbing moments. He came in cocky, ready to dominate the headlines again by undermining a progressive voice with a cheap jab. On the other was Jasmine Crockett, poised yet underestimated. A former public defender from Texas, she carried not just her district on her shoulders, but every young black girl who's ever been told her voice didn't sound professional enough. This wasn't just about an accent. It was about identity, dignity, and defiance. The stakes were raw and real. J.D. wanted to score political points with a smirk. Jasmine was fighting to make sure no child watching at home felt ashamed of who they were. She had seconds to decide whether to fire back or let it slide. And the moment Jasmine opened her mouth, the entire room shifted. The hearing was already tense. The topic, systemic disparities in the U.S. justice system, had triggered sparks on both sides of the aisle. But when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was called to speak, J.D. Vance saw an opportunity. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked, eyes gleaming with the smug confidence of a man convinced the cameras adored him. As Jasmine began laying out her case, citing wrongful convictions, over-policing in black communities, and a recent Texas ruling on cash bail, J.D. tilted his head and chuckled. "A fascinating perspective, Congresswoman," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "I must admit I almost missed your legal argument under all that Southern charm." The room went still. Jasmine blinked, expression unreadable, but J.D. wasn't done. He pressed forward with the aggression of someone trying to turn public service into performance art. "I'm curious," he said, flipping through his notes theatrically. "Are you quoting legal precedent or just repeating talking points from MSNBC?" A few Republicans chuckled. One aide in the back looked up. From his phone, J.D. smirked. "Because I was under the impression we were here for a fact-based discussion, not a dramatic reading of woke justice poetry." Laughter broke out, faint but audible. He looked around, pleased with himself. "Tell me, Congresswoman, when exactly did courtroom theatrics become more important than constitutional principles?" His words hung in the air like poison. The attack was clear. He wasn't just dismissing her policy points, he was discrediting her intelligence, mocking her voice, and attempting to turn the room against her before she could even finish. Hero's first counterattack, Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, adjusted her mic, and spoke with a steady, measured calm that made J.D.'s smugness look juvenile by contrast. "Well, Senator Vance," she began, her voice clear and composed, "I appreciate your interest in courtroom theatrics. That's actually where I began, as a public defender, representing people who didn't have the privilege of Ivy League lawyers and media consultants writing their lines." The room shifted. Several eyes turned toward her, alert now. "You seem to think my accent is an indicator of ignorance," she said. "But where I come from, we measure intelligence by the strength of your argument, not the zip code you grew up in." J.D.'s smile faded slightly. "As for quoting legal precedent," she continued, pulling out a tabbed binder, "I'll start with Gideon v. Wainwright, 372 U.S. 335, 1963, a ruling that guarantees legal counsel regardless of income. The exact principle your bill last year tried to undermine by restricting public defense funding." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "And if I sound a little theatrical," she added with a gentle smile, "maybe it's because I'm used to fighting for people who don't get to rehearse their pain." J.D. opened his mouth but hesitated. He hadn't expected her to come with case law, composure, and a jab at his legislative record, all in under a minute. The Democrats behind Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Staffers whispered. Even a few on. The Republican side looked uncertain. Audience reactions on Twitter clips were already surfacing. Court Watch 2025. Did J.D. Vance just mock her accent? That was wildly disrespectful. She handled it like a pro. Policy hawk. Crockett just cited Gideon Veer's Wainwright Live while J.D. tried to make jokes. Who's the real lawyer here? ASTX resistance. Say what you want, but Jasmine Crockett is sharp. That was calm, classy, and absolutely surgical. Back in the room, a CNN correspondent muttered to his producer, "Cut to Crockett, she's changing the whole vibe." J.D. Vance shifted in his seat. The laughter was gone now. The room had cooled. He hadn't lost yet, but he knew it. The balance of power had shifted. Cliffhanger, but that was just the beginning. What happened next changed everything. J.D. Vance wasn't used to being embarrassed, especially not publicly, and especially not by someone the media often underestimated. Jasmine Crockett's first counter had landed harder than he expected, and it rattled him. So he did what men, like him, often do when challenged. He doubled down. He shifted in his seat, picked up a paper from the stack before him, and smirked like he was about to unleash a secret weapon. "Well," J.D. said, lifting his voice slightly so the C-SPAN cameras could catch every syllable. "That was a lovely defense, Congresswoman. But I suppose it's easy to talk about the struggles of the justice system when you're sitting in that seat now. After rising through elite institutions, after getting elected, after the spotlight found you," he turned to the chairperson. "This isn't about emotion," J.D. continued. "This is about facts, about honesty. And if the Congresswoman wants to talk about defending the voiceless, maybe she should also talk about her own campaign contributions from billionaire PACs that fund private prisons." Gasps. A few murmurs. Someone coughed awkwardly. J.D. pressed on. "Or is it easier to shout racism than to answer for your own hypocrisy?" His tone was colder now. "Congresswoman Crockett talks about being a defender of the oppressed, but her FEC filings tell a different story. Big money, big donors, and not a single bill passed in her first term. Is that what leadership looks like?" The attack was brutal, calculated, not just meant to discredit her ideas, but to shatter her credibility, to paint her as a fraud who wore the language of justice like a costume. J.D. leaned back again, satisfied. He had gone for blood. Hero's second counterattack, the silence was thick. Jasmine slowly placed her notes on the table, laced her fingers, and spoke. Not with anger, but with a clarity that cut deeper than any insult. "Senator Vance," she began, "you seem very interested in my campaign donations. I'd be happy to provide a full list line by line after this hearing." A few people chuckled nervously. "But let me make something very clear," she continued. "Unlike you, I didn't marry into Silicon Valley wealth. I didn't get my book ghostwritten after profiting off poverty. And I didn't build my career by telling poor Americans their pain was their own fault." The room snapped to attention. She turned slightly toward the panel. "I'm proud of where I come from. Yes, I've received support from groups that care about reform, but I've never taken a dime from lobbyists supporting tax breaks for corporations that exploit workers in your home state of Ohio." J.D. shifted in his chair. "And as for your little accusation," she added, "I didn't shout racism. I lived it. I represented clients who were thrown in jail for being poor, while men who looked like you got bail by morning." Her voice rose, controlled but fierce. "You think I talk like this for effect? That I carry these stories because I want to sound emotional? No. I carry them because if I don't, no one else will. You mock my voice, but what scares you isn't how I sound. It's that people are finally starting to listen." Boom. A long pause. Not one sound from J.D. Vance. Not even a smirk now. Audience reactions phones were up. Aides were texting frantically. Live stream chats exploded. Justice Watch. Jasmine just body slammed Vance with facts and personal truth. That last, Tharsau. Legal Eagle 2025. That's how you reframe an attack into a moment of moral power. Crockett is brilliant. OH Politics. Vance went too far, that ghostwriting jab. She hit harder than anyone expected. In the hearing room, an audible shift had happened. Even some Republicans looked unsure. A few glanced at JD like he had overplayed his hand. The room was no longer his. Cliffhanger, but the next move from JD Vance would be his biggest mistake yet. JD Vance wasn't done. Not yet. Despite being visibly shaken by Jasmine Crockett's last rebuttal, the senator straightened up, put on his lawyer face, and reached for a folder on the desk beside him, marked in bold, Crockett voting record. He cleared his throat, this time with a colder, quieter confidence. "If I may, Chair," JD began, "since the Congresswoman is now lecturing us on criminal justice reform, perhaps she'd like to explain this." He lifted a page for the cameras. House Bill 4119, a proposal from last year to redirect $40 million from federal private prison contracts into mental health diversion programs. He paused for effect. "You voted against it." Silence. Then he flipped to another page. "And House Bill 2073, similar premise. Another no from you. You claim to fight for the people, but your record tells a different story." He looked directly at her, almost smug now. "Would you like to explain to the American people why someone with your background would vote against a bill that claimed to reduce incarceration rates? Or," he leaned forward, "did you not understand the economic modeling it was based on?" There it was, a trap dressed as a question. The implication was devastating, that Jasmine Crockett either didn't care enough to fight for what she claimed to stand for, or worse, she wasn't smart enough to grasp the deeper legislative mechanics behind the bill. JD folded his hands like a prosecutor in closing arguments. He believed he had her cornered. Hero's unexpected response. But Jasmine Crockett didn't even flinch. She didn't touch her papers, didn't ask for time, didn't panic. She leaned slightly forward with a smile so calm it made JD visibly blink. "I'm glad you brought that up, Senator," she said, voice steady, "because what you've just proven is that you didn't read the full legislative analysis, just the surface level summary." JD opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Jasmine continued, "You're talking about House Bill 4119. I voted no after the amendment from Rep. Larson stripped out the provision that guaranteed those diverted funds would go to community-based mental health centers, not to for-profit telehealth contractors," her murmurs began. "You see," she said, "that version of the bill would have ended up sending millions to a tech firm based in, wait for it, your state, where you held stock options as recently as last year." JD's eyes widened. "And House Bill 2073? She said, turning toward the panel. "That was a classic poison pill. Hidden on page 37. Language that would have allowed ICE detention centers to reclassify inmates, skirting legal limits on capacity. A bureaucratic loophole disguised as mental health reform." Gasps, audible this time. "And I called it out in committee," she added. "But I don't recall seeing you in that room, Senator." JD Vance's face was frozen. "You thought you'd caught me in a contradiction," Jasmine continued, voice now rising with conviction. "But all you did was prove that you brought a cherry-picked soundbite to a policy war." The trap had been turned. Completely. Audience reactions. The silence in the hearing room collapsed under a wave of gasps, whispers, and stunned glances. C-SPAN Live. Crockett just exposed JD Vance for misreading his own exhibit. She dismantled him line by line. The Hill Watcher. That ICE loophole bombshell? Crockett knew the bills better than the guy who brought them. Gen Z justice. Jasmine didn't just survive a trap, she flipped it and set it on fire. Even the chairperson, neutral up to this point, was caught shifting uncomfortably. One aide whispered something to another and passed them a phone. Twitter was melting. JD didn't speak. He couldn't. His own intellectual ambush had detonated in his hands, and everyone saw it. Cliffhanger. And just when everyone thought it was over, Jasmine Crockett dropped a final bombshell. J.D. Vance shuffled his papers. His hands, once so steady and composed, now moved with visible tension. He cleared his throat again, but this time it wasn't for control. It was a delay tactic. "Look," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're here to talk about solutions, not play gotcha games over legislative language buried in the fine print." Jasmine Crockett didn't even blink. The cameras caught everything. The way J.D. avoided looking her in, the eye, the way he shifted in his seat, how he began flipping pages that no longer helped him. Then he tried to pivot. "Frankly," he continued, "this entire hearing has become less about policy and more about political theater. Congresswoman Crockett is clearly passionate, and that's commendable. But passion doesn't replace substance." A weak applause. 2 people, maybe 3. He was losing the room, and everyone could feel it. Hero seizes the moment. Jasmine leaned in, locking eyes with him. "I'm glad you brought up substance, Senator, because you haven't offered any." Her voice was calm, firm, precise. "You walked in here expecting to humiliate me with old sound bites and half-read bills. And now, when the facts aren't in your favor, you call it theater. That's not leadership. That's evasion." J.D. opened his mouth again. Jasmine raised a hand gently, not to interrupt, but to command attention. "I come from a district that lives every single consequence of bad legislation. People in my neighborhood don't have the luxury of deflecting. We don't get to hide behind excuses when lives are on the line." You could feel the shift in the room. She wasn't just talking to J.D. anymore. She was talking to everyone. To the people watching at home who've been told their accent makes them sound uneducated. She looked directly into the camera now. To the ones who've been told they weren't smart enough, weren't classy enough, didn't belong in the room. This is your moment. A wave of silent nods moved across the audience. Phones went up. Live stream chats exploded. And truth feed now. J.D. is literally shaking. Jasmine is commanding the whole chamber like a professor in court. Educated South. I cried when she looked in the camera. This is for every girl who grew up code switching to be heard. Watchdog DC. Crockett just transformed the hearing into a masterclass on integrity and intellect. J.D. Vance tried once more. "This isn't personal." "But it is personal," Jasmine fired back, voice rising now with righteous intensity. "You made it personal the moment you mocked my accent, the moment you questioned my intellect, the moment you brought up selective legislation to paint me as a fraud." She paused, letting the silence hang. "I earned my law degree from the same Ivy League you love to quote, but more importantly, I earned my place here by fighting for people your policies ignore." You could feel the crowd flipping. Audience reactions. A congressional aide in the back whispered, "He's done." Reporters started scribbling faster. Even members of J.D.'s own party avoided eye contact as he stared down, lips pressed tight. His confidence, the smug smirk, the smug laugh, it was all gone. In the live stream feed, hearts, clapping emojis, fire, thousands of reactions pouring in. She's not just winning, she's rewriting the narrative in real time. This is what leadership looks like. J.D. should have walked out 5 minutes ago, now it's too late. Cliffhanger. But the final moment of truth was still to come. J.D. Vance was visibly cornered. His eyes darted to the committee chair, then to the audience. He tried to regain footing, not through facts, but flair. "Well," he said, forcing a chuckle, "I guess this hearing's become more about feelings than facts. Maybe next time we'll just let TikTok decide policy." A ripple of forced laughter from a few of his allies, dry, nervous. He wasn't speaking to Jasmine anymore. He was performing damage control for the cameras. But even his charm, which once worked so well in interviews and town halls, was failing him here. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Hero delivers the final word. She stood. Not out of anger, not out of desperation, but out of power. "I want to thank you for reminding me why I do this," she said, voice steady, hands unclenched. "Because This is the exact condescension black women face every day. The suggestion that we're too emotional, too dramatic, too loud. She took one step forward, and yet, somehow, not loud enough when we're demanding justice. JD blinked, hard. You could see it now, the loss, the exhaustion behind the eyes. But let me be crystal clear. I'm not here because I'm emotional. I'm here because I'm qualified, she said, reaching into her folder. She pulled out a document, highlighted crisp, glowing under the chamber lights. It was his voting record. Page 7 of your own 2023 proposal on social reform, she said. You cited increased policing as a solution to economic instability in black neighborhoods, while slashing funding for housing and education. JD stiffened. That's not economics, Jasmine said sharply. That's containment disguised as policy. And I'm not going to let you spin oppression into patriotism. She wasn't done. One more thing. Because you question my accent, Senator Vance, like that somehow equates to intelligence. She reached for her tablet, swiped once, and turned the screen toward the audience and cameras. It displayed her Harvard Law transcript, perfect GPA, Dean's commendations, pro bono criminal justice reform leadership. You may laugh at my accent, she said, eyes locked on JD. But I studied constitutional law at Harvard while working nights defending innocent clients who couldn't afford bail. What were you doing? Writing books about hillbilly values while voting against veterans' health care? JD's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Silence. Not just from him, from the whole room. Audience reactions. The first clap came from the back row, then two more, then the wave. Applause thundered through the chamber. Even representatives from across the aisle looked stunned. Some stood, some just watched in disbelief. Civic Pulse Live. She just silenced an entire Senate. Panel, Young Lawyers for Justice. Every black girl in law school just got a new icon. Crockett, mic dropped. Veteran voices. JD Vance couldn't answer for his own bills. That transcript moment was savage and necessary. Even the live streams, subtitle captioner accidentally typed, applause, 3 times. Jasmine placed the tablet back down. Respect isn't given by pedigree, she said finally. It's earned by showing up with truth and standing firm when they try to laugh you out of the room. She sat. JD remained frozen, jaw locked, eyes wet. Cliffhanger. And that's when the real shock came next. Furrow. JD Vance didn't storm out. He didn't yell. He didn't smirk. He just sat there. Quiet. Small. Like a man who had walked into a ring thinking he'd outwit the underdog, only to find out the underdog had studied every move, every weakness, every contradiction in his playbook. The committee chair gavelled once to bring the room back to order, but the energy never returned to neutral. The silence around Vance had weight, like the ghost of a man realizing the theater of power had just collapsed around him. One camera caught him adjusting his mic. Another caught him whispering to an aide, "Don't respond, just let it go." By the time the session ended, JD Vance was no longer the dominant force in the room. He was an afterthought. The moment that had once belonged to him now had Jasmine Crockett's name stamped across every news chyron in the country. Hero's final message. As the committee wrapped, Jasmine remained in her seat a moment longer. She looked out at the press gallery. Dozens of eyes locked on her, some in awe, others in disbelief. She leaned forward. "Let me say one last thing before we adjourn," she said calmly. Because today wasn't just about one insult. It was about something much deeper. She paused. Too often, folks in power use laughter as a weapon. They mock our voices, our origins, our experience. Because they know the minute we speak, with truth their entire illusion unravels. She turned, addressing the nation now, not just the panel. But we don't need to change our accents. We don't need to shrink. We just need to know who we are and come prepared. Key takeaway. Her voice softened with conviction. You see, I didn't go to Harvard to impress anyone. I went because I wanted to change systems that never worked for people who look like me. And I'm standing here now not just for myself, but for every student who's ever been laughed at for not sounding smart enough. A subtle nod to the gallery. A final beat of silence. And here's the truth, plain and simple, she said. Intelligence, merit, and truth always rise above arrogance and manipulation, every single time. Call to action. The video would go on to be clipped and shared across the internet, but it ended with one message etched into the screen in bold. Do you think justice was served? Drop your thoughts below. If you believe truth beats privilege, share this video and let the world know. They can mock your voice, but they can never silence your truth. The story may have ended in that chamber, but the real conversation had just begun. Fade out.